Okay, welcome to this week's video, and this time round I've been asked to take on a topic by a couple of people which has been in the news recently, and that is the recent surge in the Dow Jones Index. Can you trust it? Can you believe it? And is one of the world's oldest indices actually that reliable? Now I know why people are asking this is because there's been one or two journalists who have commented directly on it. Okay, John Authers in the FT, for example, is a comment elsewhere, so let me give you my take. Now, the Dow Jones is just an example of a stock index, okay, so it captures the movement in share prices over a particular period in time, and in another video, what is an index? I explain in a bit more detail how it works, but the question I've been asked isn't, the absolute detailed mechanics. It's there's some talk about, is the recent surge to what appears to be, a new record level only a couple of weeks ago for the Dow Jones, is it reliable? Is it giving you the right picture? And the answer is no. Not entirely. In a nutshell, the message from this video is that the Dow Jones in particular is not a fabulous guide to what's really going on in the American economy. I'll give you 2 or 3 reasons why. Okay. Number one, there's a clue in the name, Dow Jones 30. Now the American economy is vast, obviously, and the Dow Jones 30 has battled on through the years. It's a very well established old index, just looking at 30 stocks. And there are plenty of people around who say that these days, although they are some of the biggest companies in the market, sure, these days that's a bit of a narrow gauge of corporate America, which is why people, including myself, tend to defer to things like the S&P 500 these days, much wider index, or you've got other variants, the Russell 50, for example. But for me, 30 is a wee bit narrow, and I'm not alone in that thought. Second problem, a little bit of techie stuff coming up. The Dow Jones is unusually these days what's called a price-weighted index. What on earth does that mean? It just means that in order to get the companies that are in the index, in the top 30 if you like, that chart of companies, what you do is literally rank them by share price. Okay? Problem with that is that if a company happens to have a low number of shares in issue with a high share price, it'll make it into the index. Whereas another company that might be massive but has issued loads and loads and loads of shares with a relatively small share price, could miss out. Okay, so you get some rather strange anomalies in the Dow Jones. Okay, you get firms like Caterpillar, which have a large share price, but are relatively small in what's called market capitalization terms, compared to other companies that arguably should be in the index and higher up it. All right, so because it gives a lot of emphasis to share price alone in deciding who's in the index, I would agree with people who say, is that really the way to rank even just the top 30 American companies? Wouldn't it be better to do it by market capitalization, number of shares times share price? And that's the way that, frankly, most other indices in the world do it. So the S&P 500, for example, does it on the basis of market cap. The FTSE 100 here does it on the basis of market cap. So the mechanism for putting together the index is a little bit antiquated. And finally, here's a problem that all indices suffer, whether they're the Dow Jones or the S&P 500 or the FTSE 100, if you're going to say things like breaks new record. And that is that they're not inflation adjusted. Okay, so you have to be careful to compare apples with apples. Because people have sort of said, oh, Dow Jones, just a couple of weeks ago, Dow Jones breaks through a record set in October 2007. So, March 2013 beats October 2007. Well, not strictly true, because there's been quite a bit of inflation between those two dates, and that's not factored directly into the comparison of the index at those 2 points. And in case you're thinking, well, how big a difference does that make? Okay, well, in very, very simple terms, if you factor inflation in, again, 1 or 2 studies come out recently, basically the index most certainly isn't higher than it was in October 2007. Factoring in a little bit of inflation, it would actually be around 10% down on where it was back then. Okay, and some would say factoring in inflation, it's got a little way to go before it sets any kind of all-time record. Right. So, in a nutshell, in the headlines, you'll see on almost a weekly basis, Dow Jones breaks new record, Dow Jones does this, Dow Jones does the other. All right, alongside headlines about the S&P 500 and the FTSE 100. And basically for 3 reasons I'm saying be careful. With the Dow Jones in particular, be careful. All right, number 1, only 30 stocks. Number 2, the calculation that uses share prices to pick them is a little bit suspect and is a little bit outdated these days. And thirdly, like all indices, there's no direct inflation adjustment in there. And on that note, I'll finish this video and look forward to seeing you next week.